What would happen if we could trust our humour a little bit more? Not take ourselves so seriously. Just have a little bit more fun. Could that be the answer to the crises we're facing? My guest this week, John Wolfstone, thinks this is just what we need. And it's the job of the sacred clown to bring it.
Welcome to the Clown Spirit Podcast. And here's your clowntastic host, Mr. Barnaby King.
Welcome to the Clown Spirit Podcast, where we celebrate and explore the ever-evolving world of clowning in all its cultural and historical breadth. This week's episode is part of the Clown Plus series, where I talk to a guest who isn't directly involved in the world of clowning, but from a related field, become fascinated by the way in which people are already embodying the clown spirit in their work. Perhaps because they bring humour, irreverence, a sense of fun, the ridiculous, or exceptional authenticity and vulnerability and apply it to their work in transforming and healing the world, though they might not necessarily call it clowning. Today's episode is one of those, but it's also a little different because my guest, John Wolfstone, knows more about clown than your average person. He calls himself an initiatory witch, an emergence facilitator, a wilderness rites of passage guide, and sacred clown. His fundamental desire and interest is regeneration, both of the natural world and human culture. How can we create a healthy, thriving human culture? And he believes that the trickster and clown need to be a central part of that. Clowns, he says, are specifically there to make fun of everything, to undo things, to turn things on their head and support people in the culture to see things inside out, upside down in an entirely new way. Because that's what keeps things alive and fresh. This idea of keeping things alive and fresh, unlocking stuck energy, has been inspired in part by John's 10-year labour of love, the film The Village of Lovers, which comes out this week and tells the story of a very unique eco-village community in Portugal. We talked at length about the film, about concepts like emergence, coherence, longing, temporary autonomous zones, meta-intelligence. We also talked about the summit that he's organising called Fugitive Futures, coming up on the 29th of January to the 2nd of February. It's obviously the season for summits because we're also having one coming up at Clown Spirit on April 10th to 13th, which we're calling Clownvergence. If you're interested in taking part in either of those, you can find the relevant links in the show notes. Now, let's get straight into that conversation with John Wolfstone. First of all, John Wolfstone, it is a pleasure to have you on the Clown Spirit podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's really fascinating to read what you do and your self-description, which includes sacred clown, which makes you extremely appropriate and fit in very well around here. So I'm hoping that we get into that very soon. But perhaps you could just start by telling us a little bit more about yourself, about your background, what it is you do, and how you got to get involved with this incredible community, this Village of Lovers, which is the movie that you're working on at the moment, and this summit that's coming up next month, or probably sooner than that, actually, if you're listening to this podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it's talking about oneself and one's history and what one has done is always so funny. And I'm just thinking back to times where I've written something of a clown bio, where I've just clowned myself by trying to make my bio ridiculous. But I think what's pertinent to know is that I've been doing art as social change since I was an adult. That was actually my major in college. And college was the first time that I came into clowning. There was a circus club in my university, and it was like the coolest people all pretty much taking drugs and making art and making community and really making theater that was involving every single element of art possible. And that's what I essentially understood circus to mean at that time. And it was actually during university that I went with my girlfriend at the time, who I met in the circus, down to Guatemala. And we spent 3 months working with a nonprofit I previously worked with, doing social circus, teaching circus arts to indigenous Maya youth. And that was my first taste of like social circus, or like what I'm calling sacred clowning, which really is, I'd say, clowning when it is linked to higher existential and social purpose and well-being, and really healing at some level. So that kind of started a lifetime and a career that has woven me in and out of doing circus and physical theater. I've done a lot of that also in the Middle East. I had a whole stint there in 2013 and 2014, and then also doing filmmaking and so many other types of arts. And as you said, yes, the last 10 years, woven in the same journey of time, I got connected to this eco village in Portugal, where I've also done quite a bit of like circus clowning stuff at that village. But that is a eco village in Portugal, which is one of the world's most successful such eco villages, one of the ones from the 60s and 70s that actually worked. And the reason they worked, I think, is of utmost importance to our species, because it's all really about how do you build trust? How do you really regenerate a healthy human culture, which I'd say that trickster and clowning needs to be a core part of. And their story and their lessons are so profound, we decided to spend 10 years making a film, which is coming out January 13th. And then we're doing this whole beautiful Fugitive Futures online summit, which also, in some ways, which is like a gathering of thought leaders and cultural revivalists to take the dialogue that the film starts deeper. But even that idea of that summit, Fugitive Futures, in some ways is really linked to the same like mimetic arc that I think clowning fills, which is like, how do we not approach things in the same status quo way that we have been, thinking somehow we're going to create solutions in when we aren't even thinking about the problems in any different way than we have been. So of course we just keep recreating the same issues. So I think the thing about clowning and trickster, which we can talk about, which is this deeper archetype found in every culture really of the sacred clown, is that essential character that is meant to stir things up and turn people's ways of thinking upside down, because humans get really attached to our ways of thinking and we tend towards dogma just out of the ease of like energy. So there's always been this essential element in regenerative culture of these clown-like characters that are specifically there to make fun of everything, to undo things, to turn things on their like head, and really support people in the culture to see things inside out, upside down, in entirely new ways, because that's what keeps things alive and fresh.
One of the problems I've always felt with talking about clowning is that we end up kind of intellectualizing and using that same logic again that you were just speaking of when we bring it into the headspace. And so that's always the danger. Also with like a podcast like this, we end up theorizing the clown and it can be really interesting. But I wonder, how do we truly embrace and embody that spirit of the trickster and the clown in a way that actually does shift our understandings and take us out of that trap of just trying to solve the same problems in the same ways?
Yeah, I think that this is really interesting, because I think originally when we talked about doing this also with Dan, who's our mutual friend, who also works in our project now and I think works with you as well, we talked about the link between clowning and Eros, and which I'm going to build to right now. What I was just talking about really is this sense of aliveness. Like, how do cultures keep things fresh? And Tamera, this eco village in Portugal, I spent 10 years making this film on. One of their core learnings was that to truly have an eco village or a commune that works, and to truly have, therefore, a regenerative culture, they needed to really unlock the intelligence of Eros and really center Eros. And this word Eros, it's like one of the Greek words for like love. People often think of erotic, but it's not just erotic love in terms of like sexuality. It really is life force. So you can say that Eros is that energy you feel in a great performance of any kind. People often will call this like duende. When something is like really spirited and alive, that is the force of Eros moving through. It's also the same thing that is like flowing through nature all the time. It's the thing that makes trees grow. It is that pulse of life to have more life. And it is inherently a creative force. So the thing is about clowning is that I really think that the reason it's hard to speak about and intellectualize clowning is that it actually is founded in that spirit of like freshness and aliveness, and in some ways really improv. I think it's really a relational. The thing about Eros is that it needs to be completely relational because the whole ecology of planet Earth is actually relational. It's all just an interaction of many different forces and beings, which are separate but not. And I think of a good, like my best moments clowning, this is for me what clowning is, it's like you are responding to the environment that like you are in. It's not so much, I think, having a planned performance. Maybe you have a sketch of a character and an idea or a certain angle. And for sure, like people have like, I have certain clown characters. Actually, me and my ex-fiance had a clown turn where I think I was and she was Os, and together we were Eros. And we were like almost making fun of Eros. But what we would do, we would start playing off of each other and we maybe have some idea. Actually, I remember a specific moment. We went out as these clowns. It was right at the start of COVID. I don't know if you have the memory. I think we all do. Maybe we blocked it out. But when you had to go to the like grocery store and you had like gloves on, and you had to wash all of your vegetables like 500 times. And so I remember we like went to the local produce market on this island we were on as clowns, clowning this like ridiculous thing that we were all having to do, and just like making fun of it because it was so stale. People got so rigid and there was so much fear. And so I think there's something in, I think, the clown that also is really looking at places of wounding and inversing it to reveal the gift and the humor and break the chain, which I think also is like how we really can get in the clowning, and what also for me makes it more sacred or more of a psychotherapeutic thing. And again, I want to say clowning being healing is also, you have to balance holding that as a intention with just it being a side effect. Because again, you could fall into the same trap of like, art clowning needs to be healing, and then you become your own dogma of whatever trip you think you're on. But there is something to, I think, what I've observed of clowning pointing at our wounds and bringing lightness and life to them, because wounds hold energy. There was a lot of bound up energy in those first days of COVID, and we were just trying to unlock the like energy. So maybe at a core level, the way I think clowning usually always happens is just unlocking stuck places of like energy. And that is Eros. That is freeing Eros. And that's why I think clowning, even though you're trying not, it's like funny, is I think clowns are often like, how can I be as unsexy as possible and make like fun of it? It's actually deeply in some ways like erotic to be in that sense of aliveness. So these are the ways I've conceived of this. And again, the practice of it is a different thing that goes beyond these words, but maybe that gives you a sense of an overview.
Yeah, beautiful. There's a kind of intimacy, I think, in clowning that I experience when you take you take your guard down and you're naked in a way. You're vulnerable in that sense, not literally naked necessarily, but you're like, you get into that space of sharing an intimacy that you might in an intimate relationship where you're letting yourself be seen. And once you get into that space, other people start to do the same thing. And so when you're clowning, you can start to feel in the space with your co-performers and with the audience as well, that we've entered this intimate space of connection. And I feel that there's a strong link there as well with the work around sexuality and intimacy and Eros, and the work that Tamera was or is is doing. Do you see that as well? Like clowning can take you into that?
Yeah, totally. I also think that it's funny. I also do a lot of work in myth, but I think that because I can say the same thing about myth, but clowning is just one of the often most accessible ways to tell hard truth. And that is inherently a very intimate act, because I think hard truths are like often the foundation of like intimacy, right? Like it's really vulnerable and intimate to being like the difficult truths of life, then like specifically with other people, because that's our fear, right? Is we're not going to be loved or accepted. And this is interesting because Tamera has a foundational social technology called form work, where they have a big circle, which is like their whole village or maybe like a subgroup. And the practice, and this is the way the community really functions and stays current and alive and healthy, is that people go in the middle and perform, and they essentially like clown aspects of their self or their psyche that they're really stuck on. Like maybe I'm really jealous of you because you're with this woman I want to be with, or some shit that could be heinous in terms of like actual like conflict. And I'd come in and well, people can't see me, but like I'd be like maybe beating my chest and being, I am so angry. I'm the alpha male. And like clowning this part of my psyche that actually is really harming me or potentially creating conflict. And there usually is a facilitator that will support and egg you on and maybe get there and clown you into it. But then ground it down, it helps you de-identify from your own psychological shit that's causing you and the community's drama and suffering, and then help you put on essentially play, clown act, theatrical gestalt thing about it, and then step out of it and maybe ground it in some kind of prayer. And I think this is maybe what's different from like normal clowning just in the world that you would see versus using clowning in community or for a social reason or for a spiritual or in conjunction with this thing, is that I think there's something intimate about witnessing a human being put on the clown mask and take it off. And getting to see like breaking that fourth wall, because we live in this like performative culture and it's all about being really good. And you can go see, I don't know, $200 a ticket clowns that are like epic performers, and they're probably hitting some sort of genius, but it's something different when this is like for the community, not to entertain. Maybe that's the like difference, is like, is the outcome to entertain, or is there a whole different cultural functioning happening? And for me, that's where the deepest intimacy is. And yes, it is extremely intimate in community or in a relationship to watch people have the capacity or support them to have the capacity to essentially make fun of themselves. And at the same time, release their own stuck energies. Because all this shit that I am like ashamed of is essentially taboo in me. That's the stuff clowns already bring out anyways. Clowns are always working in the taboo, as far as I can tell. So it's to do that in our own personal lives is the place of intimacy and genius, and to let others in our personal lives into that. I guess what I'm seeing is a whole revolution around how intimate relationships can work and be good. Is can we bring clowning in some kind of healthy, semi-structured way into our communities and relationships? And that's what Tamera's done.
Please forgive a brief interruption for me to tell you about Clown Spirit Village. This is our community of humans who are deepening their connection to the vital and life-giving spirit of clowning by participating in workshops, coaching sessions, and more, all inside this unique online membership. We've just launched a new tiered pricing scheme that allows you to pay as little as $29 a month to get full access to resources that will allow you to unleash your clown energy, whether you're a complete beginner or a more experienced practitioner of clowning. Our goal is not only to support performers, but the many, many people who are realizing that they want to bring more joy, lightness, and fun into their lives, and they found clowning to be the perfect way to do that. As John has pointed out, we're living in precarious times, and we need the clown more and more to unlock stuck energy, to tell hard truths, and to help us break the chain and de-identify from our psychological shit. If you're interested in finding out more, check out the website at www.clown-spirit.com. Join the village and clown with us. Now back to John Wolfstone.
Let's talk a little bit about Tamera, because we've been talking about it, but we haven't necessarily given folks who are listening the context. But your movie, Village of Lovers, which is coming out on the 13th, and will maybe have already launched by the time maybe people are listening to this. It's really based on an immersion. You spent time with this really exceptionally unusual community that originated in Germany, I think, although you said you were in Portugal. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of that organization and and your involvement with it?
Yeah. What Tamera says, which is very true, they are like a modern tribe. Like going into their culture is like an anthropological experience, as if you could go to some intact tribe. Their culture is so foundationally different than the world most of us are living in like the globalized world. It's essentially like falling into a fairy tale. That is what it's like going to Tamera. It's like beyond any workshop you've been in or ayahuasca like circle. This is a far out experience. And again, it doesn't feel that radical when you're there. Like Burning Man's far more flashy and radical, quote unquote, but at a foundational level, how they're actually living differently and sharing resource and sharing love and being transparent and working in peace, they are like as radical as it gets. With that said, the history is that Tamera started in the late 60s, early 70s in Germany. And mind you, this is like society coming out of World War II on the losing side, facing the consequence of the Holocaust, that like they did it. There was a lot happening globally, but on this side of the pond, it was like a different reaction to like racism and certain things that were happening in that time in the whole Vietnam War. So imagine that same generation growing up post-war in reaction to the most heinous atrocity ever. So there were all these movements in that time of like, how do we create peace and never let this happen again? And then what happened is that certain key people in these movements started to witness that these people, mostly like leftists who were trying to fight the establishment, started creating the same thing they were fighting. And they started infighting. So they were fighting to create a more peaceful world. And I just said it. They were fighting to create a more peaceful world, and they would get in power and they would create the same systems of power that would just be as eventually like a corrupt as the other ones. And they're like, okay, maybe it's not about who's in leadership. It's more foundational to like basic like structures of power, love, sex, and money. Those core things that human beings tend to fight about, especially once we're in groups. And starting in 1978, a core group formed, and they're like, we're just going to do a 3-year research experiment into a culture of peace. And one of their key research areas was love and sexuality, which Tamera is famous for. Okay, we see this assumed nuclear family monogamous culture actually causes a lot of tension. And let's just liberate that. This is coming out of the free love 60s, right? So they're like, how do we take this, but actually deeper? Because that also didn't quite work. It also was just messy and a lot of fights. And they really started to research. And this is when they started to uncover this work with Forum. And they're like, whoa, okay, actually the core issue is building trust. How do we do essentially group shadow work? Because the shadows are coming up. And how do we do it in a way that builds trust? So they started doing that, and it was working, and they grew, and they were really creating this much more liberated group field. And so they did that for 10 years in Germany. They eventually got run out of Germany because they were called a cult, which is pretty much anybody doing anything like this was called a cult. And there were many cults, and still is, I would say. So Tamera in the late 80s started searching for where else to go, and eventually were like spiritually led, which is a whole longer story, to Portugal, landed there, and for the last 30 years have been living pretty much off grid in a growing community that now is 200 people on 200 hectares of land. They've also gone into how do we regenerate every aspect of life. So they've regenerated their like desertified Portuguese landscape with these water retention ponds and created this oasis of beauty and permaculture gardens and water in this pretty hot and dusty, dry, like southern Portuguese land. And they really created this flourishing culture, which not only has these founders in this older generation, but has attracted new people and young people. And a core to that reason is one, this work around Eros, and let's liberate these powers of Eros and sexuality. But the other core thing is that, and this is what makes them so unique and beautiful, they are not some like, let's go hide off in our eco village while the world burns. They're like, oh, we are part of planet Earth. And if planet Earth, if like humanity goes like down, we are going down with it. So they've always understood themselves as something of like activists, and that they see themselves as a model for what global peace culture could be like, which again, will have a lot of diversity, but there are certain principles which I'd say could be shared across this planet of what really create peace. And they've been dedicated to being like a research lab of peace and trust. And they've also done tons of sister projects in conflict areas on planet Earth because they believe these conflict areas like Israel, Palestine, like Colombia, like Cameroon, like certain parts of India, in certain moments are like acupuncture points on planet Earth. And if you could bring peace right now to like Israel and Gaza, that would have a pretty big field effect on the planet. So they've been doing this like deep activism work while also living it in integrity. And the last thing I'll say is that what's so unique is that they understand that if they aren't living in integrity with a culture of peace, their efforts towards outer peace work are going to be nullified. And I think we all face that in the modern world. Like, I want a like regenerative, beautiful earth, and I do certain things, but I also, because the way the world is, I fucking shop on Amazon and I drive my gas guzzling car and I do all these things which ultimately are in contradiction to my other efforts. And that's the trap of the modern globalized world. And Tamera's been like, whoa, how do we slow down and from the ground up build something with more integrity? It's not like they don't have problems. They have a lot, but they found a pretty good way to continually work on them. And the like fruits of that is what we're showing in this film and hoping to support translating to the millions of people right now that want to live in community and want to be part of a different system than the crazy fucked up world that we live in mostly.
Yeah, that's very compelling. I definitely want to be part of that. I don't want to say solution because I think that solution already conjures the kind of like traditional ways of thinking, right?
Yes.
But creating different futures for ourselves. And I'm really fascinated by different people's ways of doing that and thinking about that. And that's partly what this podcast has been about. I've talked to a lot of people like Manish Jain, for example, in India, who's with the unlearning movement, and he's on the same mission. It seems like there's a lot of people around the world who have that same thinking and inspired motivation to try to discover what it is that we need to be doing differently to live beyond this cataclysmic future that is like bearing down on us right now. How do we survive that? And how do we potentially create something that's sustainable and balanced beyond that in the long term? I guess what I'm noticing is that there are networks and there are things that are connecting all these people together, but I'm wondering sometimes it feels like there's a lot of people in little pockets around the world doing that work. And how are we going to bring it to a population or to an audience that's large enough that where it's actually going to reach a tipping point and things are actually going to change? Or do we need to come to the brink of disaster for people to actually accept something like this? Because it still feels fringed. It still feels radical and alternative. And
totally. This is a great question. And I think in some ways it's both. And yeah, this last part of your question about do we need to come to the brink of destruction? I think at some level, yes. But what I observe in most human beings' lives is like, there is this generative place where you need to have enough chaos and like your shit getting bad. But at the same time, if it gets too bad, it can really seriously harm you. And, if it gets too bad, you die or so you like get drug overdose or whatever. And I think there's something about, I'm going to use some like new agey spiritual speak. So, just warning the audience, at a lower vibrational frequency, we are motivated short term by pain to change for evolution. But I think there is a gap in our evolution of our consciousness and our species of needing to be motivated by pleasure and joy and nourishment, which actually is a much better long-term motivator, but not as often immediate. So I think we're in a species-wide moment, and I see it in my own personal life of like fear and like destruction motivates me, but not that long-term. And really, the more I root into the beauty and the resource and the joy is actually the deeper nourishment. So I think this year, and I think we're seeing it, we are at the brink of a certain kind of destruction. It could get a lot worse. But if it gets a lot worse, I think planetary tipping points are like too far gone. The chance of having a habitable climate is like not that good, for instance. So there's something also about how does the beauty of a more beautiful world be what draws us in, right? And so there's something about, I think, longing. And it's funny, clowning, as we talked about the wounds, but I think clowning also gets into the nature of longing. And like, how do I clown and give expression to this longing? Which, for instance, Tamera breaks down so beautifully. Say that like basic longing, I want to get with this beautiful like woman. Classic thing every human deals with, right? Or whatever gender you are, want to be with, whatever. This other human is hot. How do I approach them? I want to be near them, whatever. And there's like a way that you can also clown a little bit your approach that is really graceful and like pretty sexy itself because you're not taking yourself too seriously. That's like the definition of cool. So there's also a way that like there is a attraction field that comes in from your willingness to play, to literally play with whatever is that kind of longing. Because again, longing doesn't really work. It's if I'm gripping on this reality must happen. I must get with you. I must say the perfect thing. It's like, I'm probably going to be all weird. And then the person's going to be like, you're weird. I don't want to touch you, whatever. That's part of the shift. But in this, how does this actually happen on a global level when it seems impossible? For me, it comes down to emergence. And I think on a like meta scale, there is this kind of social psychological tipping point. People talk about the like 100th monkey theory. If you get 100 monkeys doing the same thing, then like it becomes like somehow a behavior in the whole like population. But that thing that happens, I'd say is emergence. And you know it, we all know it. And it's really what I'd say, this is also like relational, a group synchronicity. But it's say that you and me are doing a clown skit and we get in those moments where it's so alive and the shit's coming out and flowing. That is emergence. It's essentially where we, as two beings or more, get so coherent, we start to partner with the intelligence of life. Again, that intelligence of Eros. And you find it in groups, like emergence, it happens in like nature. And you can think of starlings, these like birds that get into these huge like flocking swarms, and they're like all moving in these simple ways, but they're becoming this like meta beautiful like dance. That's like, how is nature doing that? Or even some schools of fish do that. And that principle, which is the meta intelligence of life, or like the intelligence of the earth taking over, is the only chance we human beings have. We need to get out of the way and let spirit do the work. But there are principles, which is what Tamera figured out really, of building trust. If you build enough trust of people and then go for your longing in a playful way, there is a meta intelligence that can come in, and that's us learning to partner with life. And that to me is the future. That is how any group will achieve what Tamera's done. Every great artist is essentially like channeling. Most great artists aren't like, it's me. They're like, there's the spirit moving through me. So it's like that at group size levels could unlock things in deeper and deeper, like fractal levels up, where it is possible we could see like consciousness shift. I look at like yoga was a fringe, weird hippie thing like 40 years ago. And I feel like the most mainstream people I know do like yoga now. So it's not crazy that behavioral changes or health changes, awarenesses can happen. And I think there is a evolutionary longing out of Earth's own desire for life and beauty. Again, there's an Eros that I think we can learn to align with, which is how this can actually be possible, that global healing, quote unquote, can happen. And I think honestly, all we need to really do is chill out a bit more and play and be willing to be vulnerable in our longings and our fears with each other, and the rest happens. So in some ways, it's like we have this huge lift and all this shit. And other levels, it's like very simple. If we just literally clown together a bit more, it will probably all just happen.
That's amazing. I love that. Let's just keep it simple.
And so it is literally emergence. The definition is it's like from simple interactions that are semi like structured. You need to have some bounds, which clowning has. You go into a clown under certain bounds, but it's simple. Very complex things come from all those simple interactions. That is the like textbook definition of emergence. So yeah, if we keep it simple and just create a few bounds for ourselves, we can make some wildly magical stuff happen that we couldn't plan or think about or like write down in our 5-year vision board.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I wonder if you have examples of where you've been able to do this in a way that's outside of your work or those frames. Because for me, clowning has always been something that is quite framed. Like I need to put on my costume and maybe my red nose, and I need to just like drop into that space, and then I'm in the clown space and I can be really super free and playful, and then I reach an endpoint and I come out of it again and I'm me again. And it's like, well, I know that clown's in there all the time, but the thing that I've always struggled with, and ironically it's what I'm most interested in and supporting others doing as well, is how can we bring that clown more to the surface in day-to-day life so that it touches more people, so that we don't have to go into a full-blown clown performance for that energy to be present and released.
I think this is interesting. This also gets to another huge part of my work, which is around ritual. And I'd say that like ritual intelligence is similar to this like emergence intelligence happening, because ultimately these bounds we're talking about, these little moments of creating like containership, are ritual actions. And every human is a ritualist. It is human to be, human to do like ritual. We all have that innate wisdom in us. And I'd say that, for instance, in the clown, the act of putting on a like clown nose, like if we were a tribe and doing that's like a deeply ritualized move that all of a sudden creates a new reality. And so I think the thing is, how do you give yourself little cues? Like people put on accents, like a ritual move, again, that give you that sense of creating like a playful space. And I'd say that I did my like undergraduate research, my research final paper from undergraduate for this like art as social change major that I did, was essentially researching this question, because, and this really gets also to the origins of Burning Man and how that culture is so like dynamic in that way of how do we culture jam and bring these moments into the daily life practices we have, and how do we create these like temporary autonomous zones, which is the work of Hakeem Bey, where we could create these like playful insurgencies in the moment. But I don't know if you can do it without cueing yourself in some kind of way. And it could be the simplest thing. Like you can maybe do a thing where you pull on your ear and you're like, I'm in the clown. I often do it when I'm hiking in like nature. I'll just create, like I will literally clown, like mime a door and then step through it or open the door. You people can't see me, but I'm like miming opening a door. And that act puts me into the fairy world. It can be hard by yourself, but if you live in a family, and this is where in culture tradition comes from, because it's hard for me by myself to remember all the shit. Again, it's the energy of more people that helps it become a cultural artifact that my personal memory bank doesn't have to keep a hold of, because I'm already too overwhelmed to remember half of what I'm supposed to anyways. But again, how do we build a cultural memory bank where these rituals just happen and we're able to access that more playful emergent space more on the regular?
A friend of mine who does a lot of Wim Hof work, and he does gibberish clown workshops as well, Alex Sternick, and he has this, I don't know if he invented it, but he talks about the word emergency, and then he breaks it down into emerge and see. And I love that. It's like the linking of those two words. Yeah, maybe there is an emergency and we have to face that. But then there's this other way of emerge and then see. It's the sense of we don't know.
And I think that's a really beautiful story that isn't actually my personal one. This comes from my filmmaking partner, Ian. His experience at a place called the New Story Summit, which was like a gathering at the Findhorn Village, Eco Village in Scotland back, I think in 2014 or 15. And it gets to the core of what you were just talking about. So this was a gathering that was a pretty emergent gathering in terms like people got together who were like new cultural leaders from around the world. And so they like painstakingly created this kind of like spreadsheet using sticky notes of this like schedule. And I think there was a lot of stress of like, we could do this workshop and you could do that thing. And they spent hours creating this thing. And I think it was like a little bit of a bad vibe. That's the sense I got from the story. So then that night, and this gets into the art of the sacred prank, which for me is like, we're talking about, and I'm going to say this person's name because I later wrote about Charles Eisenstein, many people know as this kind of cultural thought leader. Him and some others went at night into the main conference room where they had this sticky board, like spreadsheet schedule. And they took out all of the like sticky notes and they repasted them with the words, "We don't know. We don't know." And the next day, all the other participants came back and their beautiful, perfectly curated schedule was fucking destroyed with the words, "We don't know." And it caused a momentary pandemonium and who do this, but eventually that chaos like needed to happen and it broke the gathering, or so I heard, into a much deeper level of not the mental, let's figure it all out and fit everything in, but what is really wanting to happen here? And how do we tune into that frequency, which isn't one of like stress? So there's something again about that, like willingness to prank because it's fun and you're willing to disturb a more stale way of being, which really gets also to the core of why we're doing this Fugitive Futures Summit, because that's really all about how do we hold space for the type of dialogue or way of being together that is really about becoming unmoored and like unmade and therefore alive to new things, which isn't like, let's sit here and figure it out. Because we've been trying to do that for the last, 50, 100, hundreds of years, and it hasn't gone so like well. So what is it to allow that energy to prank and have fun and trusting our humor? We all have dark humor. And what if we trusted that a bit like more? I think that's the core of what you're talking about in this bigger cultural level.
Yeah, totally. It's bringing that irreverence and chaotic energy, trickster energy into all areas of life. It's beautiful. I'm curious, John, you just mentioned the conference. And I think people listening might be curious to get involved or to know a bit more about it.
Yeah.
Do you want to maybe speak a little bit about the
So
Futures?
yeah, so it's part of this wider launch of our film. But again, we only made a film in order to really start a bigger dialogue about the topics. And it's like, wait, people watch this film, but like we need to actually get together and have like there's so many conversations needing to happen that are not having space for, right? Just the Trump being elected here in the States, which also isn't entirely a black and white thing, right? It's also not entirely bad, although most of my friends, I think so. But it's, again, there's just so much going on. It's such deep foundational levels and the world's so busy. When do we ever fucking stop and be like, wait, hold on. Can we just talk about what's happening at like a deeper level and like really at a deeper level? And that's the space we are creating for 5 days. We're going to go through a kind of rite of passage style 5-day arc where it's going to start in really reckoning with what like is some hard truth, and then space for really grief. Like, how do we feel the fuck is happening? And then from that place, repair. Okay, it's a big thing. If we're going to actually build a more beautiful world, there's a lot we need to actually reckon, grieve, and repair before we're just visioning new things. And then on the 4th day, from that place, we can get to really what is a more rooted vision, right? Because there's been a lot of colonial visionings that have happened from really disconnected people running their own wounds into the vision space. And that is manifest destiny. And the next thing you know, you have a bunch of white Europeans coming to these lands and creating a genocide. Like, that is the history we have inherited as Americans, quote unquote. And then finally, from that day of then, let's like vision from this different place, really being a vessel for like vision, is the final day is emergence. And actually there was a like original arc that kind of was inspired by the journey caterpillar takes to a butterfly. So there is that like kind of mapping of nature into this. So those are the days. But then each day we have a few slots of featured like cultural thought leaders that are just tracking the stuff in really deep ways, followed by these butterfly talks, which are going to be more like TED style shorter talks. I believe you're actually going to come and give one of these talks.
Yeah.
So, which is great. So, for people just to also give a little bit quicker, deeper, and then people are going to have a chance to speak directly with people giving the like butterfly talks. Then we're going to have integration space, which is a space where like all of the people coming, we can dialogue, we can get like in there, we can go in breakout rooms, we can connect, see what wants to happen. And then in the afternoon, again, this is US time, but if you're in Europe or Australia, we'll ship based on that. But the second part of the day is workshops, which are like practical skill building things. And we have some, and like rituals. We have a grief ritual. We have a like art of relational repair. We have Lydia, Violet, and Leah from Rising Appalachia, very like well-known like folk duo who are coming to do this kind of like ancestral reconnection, reckoning. We're doing so many cool things. And again, there's gonna be a lot of space for the emergence of what wants to happen. And hopefully we're like moving something forward in our own personal lives, but also in the transpersonal collective space. And the whole thing, including our film, is really in our vision of ethical economics, which is like us trying to bridge gift economics, which our film is entirely gift. Like, you get to choose, and we trust, and we've gotten the amount that we have wanted. So please come and join us. You can look at thevillagelovers.com/summit. Probably it's in the show notes.
And the movie, how can people watch that, John? What's the means of seeing it?
Just have to go to our website. Probably by the time this was out, we're talking, go there right now, villagelovers.com. You'll be like immediately in, you click like one or two things and then you're watching the film, watch it with friends. It's an amazing film. I feel like, no, art is hard. And after making art, like there were so many times during this journey of this film, I was like, one, not thinking this was ever going to be done or finished. It's my first film and thinking it wasn't ever going to be done or finished, and that it would suck. There was, even after it was finished, there were so many, it took a long time, and we toured it around the world. I was in Germany last fall, like in Berlin and London, screening it. And I was like, I'm proud. This is actually a good film. It's not, I don't think it's not like we didn't make this film to win Sundance. It's more like, check out this really inspiring story that's going to blow your mind. And it does that. Like, it will blow your mind and you will be inspired, and it's visually beautiful, and you will leave juiced and turned on and ready to like create.
That's so cool. I'm very excited to see it. I have a curiosity. Are you tempted, or have you been tempted to go and live in this Tamera community?
Totally. And one thing that I've really reckoned with, and this is my own ancestral reconnections, part of my own journey again. When I was there, I remember I was there at the edge of Europe, of Portugal, looking out across the Atlantic. I can't see to America, but I'm like looking at this continent where I live and my ancestors came. And I'm like, had this clear sense, like a clear message from my ancestors. They're like, we didn't come across a fucking ocean for you to go back. And that's my sense, is that my destiny somehow as a soul is intertwined to Turtle Island, to North America, where I currently live, where you currently live, and that there's work here to be done. It'd be more fun and easy if I could just live in Tamera. They already figured it out. But I think the much more interesting and hard thing is to like, how do I really recreate that here? And again, recreate is just whatever it emergently wants to be here. And so I hope to live in Village one day in my life, maybe with many of you, but how that's going to happen is going to be up to really the like goddess at this point.
We've been talking for a really long time, and we could keep talking for a long time. And I'm also feel like every single word that you've said and that we talked about is important and powerful. So I hope that we can somehow in the future find a place and a way to come together and play.
I love that. I feel both humbled and honored to hear you say that. I'm like, wow, I'm really like letting it in. And I'm also having this thought. I'm like, yeah, Barnaby, I need you to come and prank me because I'm human. I'm fallible. I can get on this train of, I got it figured out. I can get arrogant. And I need you to come and help me remember to prank myself and be pranked so that I keep myself on the ground. Because, right now doing this launch, there's a lot of energy and that's beautiful. And I think we're here as human beings to release our energy. And it's really important to have friends and allies that are drawn towards us to both support us and knock us down just a little bit so that we stay real. I'm also excited to connect in person and do things and make magic happen. So I also love invitations. I'm trying to be more in this after pushing so much, a way of being invited. So if you have invitations for me, humans, world of whatever kind, to work, to create, to collaborate, to present, to speak, to dance, and you can reach out to me and I'll say likely yes.
Yeah. So, and totally, I would encourage my clown spirit friends and community to check out John's presence, the movie when it comes out, and to attend the summit and to just stay connected because it's very closely allied and connected with what we're trying to do in clown spirit. And so you guys are like, there's I want to say brotherhood, but what's a brotherhood, sisterhood, neighborhood, worldhood?
A neighborhood?
Global hood.
Global hood?
Yeah.
We're kin. We're blood family.
We're kin. Yeah.
We're just family. We're family. We're a community. Kin. Maybe it's that. We are kin.
Yeah.
There.
Beautiful.
Hop on the kinship, everybody. All aboard.
The kingship.
The kinship. Or the kingship, whatever. We can make it royal. All good.
I love it. I love the word ship as well. Kinship.
Yeah. The kinship, the relationship. Yeah. All the nice ships. It's like we're going on a voyage together. Ship Earth. So
that's it. We're travelers. We're all travelers.
We're all traveling.
In our bones, in our blood.
Amen.
Thank you so much for hanging out with me for this hour. It's been enlightening and just joyful.
Thank you as well. I look forward to more soon.
Great stuff there from John Wolfstone, a playful individual, but like myself, also quite a serious one, who is engaged in work he is passionate about and inspiring others. So please do check out the Village of Lovers website, watch the movie, and maybe go along to their online summit, Fugitive Futures, starting on January 29th. Don't forget to check out Clown Spirit Village and our Clownvergence conference, all at www.clown-spirit.com. And please help us spread this podcast far and wide. Our most important asset in unleashing more clowns into the world is you, introducing your friends, family, and wider community to the wonderful and transformative world of clowning. So why not do it today? See you next time for another episode. And for now, keep clowning.